And we'll move on to the Finance Committee report.
Hooray. We looked at some good and interesting things in Finance Committee last month. The most interesting thing is probably the first thing, which is the Memorandum of Understanding to join with a number of other states on NGSS kind of test question bank. In short, kind of some of the issues, we are only doing NGSS for grades 6 through 8. The test bank is made up of grades 3 through 12. There's no financial liability for participating in the sharing group. There's kind of some common standards. We're required to share 130 total items, or I think questions, in exchange for access to about 970. And these questions will then come back, and before they can be shown to students, they go through a 15-member review committee that includes, I believe, how many members appointed by our board? 8. Wait, only 5. I think we appoint 5. 5. And we had an interesting side discussion on to what extent we have been appointing those people and where they are. Does anyone have an update maybe on that? Chair Huntsman or Superintendent?
Well, I can give you an update, and
Please.
that is, the update that I can give you is when this came out, is we went back and looked and seen who was on that, and none of them were appointed by me over the last couple of years. They're very antiquated names on this, so it's on the to-do is to reappoint the 5 USBE parent review committee members, but that's as it moves. Is that my understanding? Sort of.
So with each review committee, names are submitted, and right now the chair can sign off on those. So we brought those to him, and I think staff brought those to you, and the chair wisely looked at the criteria, and we made some recommendations for changes so that they would be more aligned with what the board members were asking for. And that was, if they had, for example, worked here previously, or we just didn't think that that was probably best practice. So we made a couple of adjustments and moved those forward. And then do you want me to continue on?
Well, on the 5 parents.
So those.
Okay. Yeah. Oh,
Go ahead.
Superintendent.
You had something else to say.
no, go ahead. You can go first. You finish, and then I'll finish up.
Well, I'm just not sure who to answer to.
I'm sorry. Chair Cummins, I'm sorry.
So we're still talking about the science.
You decide.
Parent committee.
I'm stopping.
Yeah. Yeah, same. Okay.
No, this is-
Sorry, I'm mixing 2 committees. Never mind. No, but those, I concur with what the chair said, that the names on there were antiquated. In fact, several we couldn't, nobody responded. Or I shouldn't say nobody responded. Several did not respond even to requests, so we revamped that list so that it was more updated.
I was just correcting.
I'm glad you did. Thank you.
Okay.
I was looking at my paper.
Board Member Cummins.
I have my concerns for this MOU has grown. I have one of the individuals on that parent committee gave me some of their concerns regarding the questions that they were reviewing, and when it came to the science, it looked like the questions were very opinionated and not fact-based. I'm reading here on the Ed Week blog concerning the science standards test that Utah had a meeting back in August, a closed discussion with AIR and John Cohen. I'd like to know what happened in that meeting. I would like to know what was discussed. I'm also having concerns that the questions themselves, and this is from the blog, this isn't from the parent review committee. Each item will test two or three of the NGSS dimensions. Many of the questions will use computer simulations. I have no problem with that, and have student conduct virtual experiments. On computer, says John Cohen, you can pretty much simulate pretty much anything. Test items will often come in clusters or several questions about a single topic that build off one another. AIR is recommending 3 to 4 items per topic cluster. With Utah only contributing 130 questions to this group, this bulk, we are already solidifying the adoption of the NGSS standards. States will likely report scores in one of 2 ways. The students will receive one of general science score and 1 score for each of the 3 dimensions. States will have to choose to have all items scored online, and states will likely have to set their own cut scores, meaning scores won't be comparable from one state to another. There's so many other concerns here, and I could go on and on and on, but I'm not comfortable pushing this MOU through.
Okay, we're going to go back to Board Member Wright to make the motion, and then if there's any discussion, we'll get to that. Just one second.
So I'll briefly wrap it up and then I'll make that motion. So I think that's actually everything. So it's kind of a twofold motion. And it's partially to address the concerns that the board vote in favor it was unanimous at the finance committee level. I had some concerns, and so I might vote differently now. Finance committee vote unanimously, the board vote in favor participating in the science item sharing consortium, and that the process be clearly outlined for appointing the 5 USBE parent review committee members.
Okay, so
I
the
make that
motion
motion.
before the board is to approve participation in the science item sharing consortium, and that the process be clearly outlined for appointing the 5 USBE parent review committee members. Is there any discussion to that motion? And we'll go to Board Member Reby had her light on, and then we'll go forward.
Need a second.
So Board Member Reby, you're okay? So then Board Member Huntsman, or Chair Huntsman.
I just want to speak to the motion briefly here, where the part of the motion that says that the process be clearly outlined for appointing the 5 USBE parent review committee members. Right now, they're appointed by the chair. And an example of that is after this came forth, as we were talking about this committee, after our meetings, this particular committee happened to be meeting the following Tuesday. So if you remember, we finished our meeting on a Thursday. Friday, we get this list, and I go and I look at it, and Lorraine has this list of people to contact, and we were not showing well. And this committee was meeting for several days, starting on Tuesday. So we frantically tried to find parents, because this committee's meeting with or without us. And so we did find some names, but I don't think we totally ended up with 5 on that. So the way this stands, if to not speak against the motion or anything, the way it is right now, the chair appoints 5 members, unless you guys change that.
So we'll go to Board Member Lear, who had her hand up.
I just would like a little more information about, well, what the vote was from the committee. Did you say that, Joel?
I did.
And it was
Unanimous
to support this.
to move it forward to the full thing.
Right. And So, and Lisa's just having concerns about that. Would somebody on that committee speak to how you felt good about it?
Oh, you can.
Okay.
I can start.
Okay, Board Member Reby and then Board Member Hanson.
We discussed this subject at length. We spent a majority of our time talking about how these questions are important for people preparing to take these assessments. Currently, we don't have a lot of items to choose from. And so because of that, our sixth grade students don't have a chance to look at and prepare themselves prior to the end of the year assessment. As we go into this consortium, we have a range of items we can choose. These items are then brought to a committee, and the committee either accepts them or does not accept them. So it's not saying that we're going to accept all of them. We are going to accept the ones that are appropriate for us and our needs. As we have said, 90% of our population takes these assessments. 90% of our population would like their students to be prepared prior to the assessment at the end of the year. That counts. So there is kind of a time constraint where we really need to have our students prepared and create a robust system for them to choose from.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Okay, Board Member Hanson.
The thing that really was interesting to me is that this isn't going to cost us anything, but it's going to save us money. So these are all interactive questions. So it costs, it's not like in the old days, like when I was in school. These are all, they cost, I think they said at least $2,000 a piece, $3,000 a piece for each question. And so if we can look through the questions that the other states have and find some that are going to work for us, that will save us $3,000 for every question that we find that will work for our testing. And so I think this is worth it. Some of these might not work for us, but we're able to look through and find the ones that are. So
Board Member, Vice Chair Ellis.
Thank you. I'm opposed to this. It's probably not a shock, but first of all, I have a kind of a lot of questions that I would like to see if they're addressed. Why do we feel like we need an agreement with a middleman to work together with other states? AIR in the contract on page 3 gets to keep royalty and exclusive rights, and we don't. I'm not sure why we would enter into an agreement for something that we can do all on our own. Page 3 also says that no party shall, either with respect to its own licensed material or respect to another contributing party's licensed material, blah, 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 blah. But basically, the end thing is that we now are bound by a contract with other states from being able to share test questions. We already have had instances where kids found inappropriate test questions, and then they're being threatened by administrators, et cetera, at a local level, that they are, sharing a test question that they felt was inappropriate. And now this is just kind of further putting a gag order on people, feeling like that we're keeping things secret from people. I understand that we have this review committee with parents. However, as one thing that's very concerning to me from the first time this review committee met to review the test question is that this office put out a report that the parents all lined up in favor of it, and that wasn't a true and accurate statement. And since then, parents that were on that committee, but they were put under a can't think of the legal term, but a non-disclosure agreement, that they couldn't talk about it, and so they felt like they couldn't really share or express that this information being presented by this office wasn't accurate. And even one of the parents that had been previously in favor of it spoke out publicly against the report, saying that they felt like it was an inaccurate depiction of what had happened. And anyway, so I can't agree with this. I think this is in poor timing. I think it's putting the cart before cart before the horse. I'm very concerned that prior to the MOU being made public, it was labeled the Next Generation Science Standards Memorandum of Understanding, and we've since relabeled everything to try to wipe clean all of that. And as I've said in the past, if we're going to move towards nationalizing all areas of content and standards in the state, I think that we need to be more honest and forthright with the public and call them what they are instead of continually renaming and labeling things as something other than what they really are. And so I'd like to call it what it is, and that these entities are all working together in an effort to create assessment questions that align with the national science standards. And so we haven't even adopted the other grades yet, that we're just tomorrow going to receive a report. And so it seems like this is a little premature to say we're going to enter an agreement that's aligning with something that we haven't officially adopted yet. So, anyways, I can go on and on as well, but I will not be voting for this.
Board Member Warner?
I have two questions. One, Chair Huntsman, you indicated that we don't have enough people. Did we get the family member or the parents that need to be on the review committee? Did we get them all as of now? Can we add more? We can't? Okay. I know we
There
had a
was-
quick turnaround.
There was 5 slots, and a bunch of them were existing from previous leadership. And at the last second, as we're trying to get confirmation that they would be attending, we were getting people that said, no, they're not. And so we're frantically looking. Also, in some of our research and looking at some of these names have been on there for quite some time, more than a couple of years for sure. And so on the to-do, depending on how what comes out of here on this for this committee assignment, we need to totally overhaul and get five new names.
Okay.
To be prepared.
Well, we had one just appointed.
Well, we had 2. No, we had one new
So
one,
they
if
were
I
just
remember right.
started.
So we can have additional parents be part of a group to review them? Is that what we're saying?
Well, no, there's 5.
5? Okay.
There's, if I
But we
remember
don't
right.
have 5 yet, so can we still put additional people on it at this point to get to the 5?
Yes.
Okay. My other question is, do we have to turn it over? Are we bound to turn every single test question we have over? Or is it what we feel?
No.
Okay, so if we, and then my last question, okay, so we're not bound by that. And then I have one last question, I'm sorry.
So in answer to are we,
Do you mind stating your name?
I'm sorry, Mike Bell, AG's office. We're not bound to turn over everything or any specific set of questions. It's in our discretion what we turn over to the group.
And then I have just one last question.
Okay,
So Patty, you wanted to say something?
did you have anything?
Okay.
Okay,
And-
go ahead.
And then my last question is, when we look at something from another state, I understand what Vice Chair Cummins is saying, or Ellis is saying about the concern about perhaps some inappropriate test questions that we've encountered. And there've been a couple of times that we've seen things in the media. Is there a way to make sure, is there somebody, an independent reviewer on that, or somebody from here that will be reviewing, somebody that will oversee, that we don't have that happen again?
One of the things I'd like to is to bring everyone back to the board docs. And if you look at the assessment and development process, so when we talk about the test item creation and development, there is the independent reviewer. And if you look, this is just step 2 in this entire process of review of the assessment and development process. So step 2 on there is the item cluster development. Then it's going to go to a content and fairness review committee. And then it will go to the parent review committee, which is legislated. And then the step 5, step 6, and step step 7. This would just be step 2 in this process, having 5 more steps in this process left to be completed. So all of those different sets of reviews will be coming. So it's not just that questions come on and then administered to children and then they have them without any type of review. So there will be another 5 additional steps after this step has been completed.
Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Many parents that I've talked to or from the process is that adopting the NGSS is already basically a done deal. No matter what debate we have, no matter what the public has, that the NGSS is already going to come through to Utah. Now, in referring back to the Ed Week article, it does state that Utah has not fully adopted, but revised to incorporate most of the NGSS. Wordsmithing to me does not mean that it's now a Utah seed standard. We have adopted the full NGSS. The feedback that I'm also hearing is that opposition voices are not being included, and therefore they feel that there is no room for them at the table to be heard, so why show up? So this process of a parental review board is basically a joke because nobody's taking it seriously, and there are already foregone conclusions of adoption, and there is no inclusion of other discussion, other viewpoints to bringing this in. We have not reviewed any other science standards. We've not looked to beyond the NGSS outside of that. I don't feel comfortable adopting an MOU that expands K through 12, regardless whether we can say no to certain questions or not. I don't trust that we will say no. I lean more to the fact that it will be a foregone conclusion with the rest of the parents that have been on the review committees that it's going to be adopted. There's nothing we can do, and therefore, why bother? I think the system, that part of it is broken because of the trust that was ensued or tried and failed.
Okay, Vice Chair Ellis.
I've been a critic openly of the parent review process with my own experience and hearing others from different standards, but that was the standards review. But I do want to give a little bit of credibility to the test review committee from this last time they met, because I did hear some positive changes from the test review that was met at the beginning of January. So I just wanted to acknowledge that was a positive experience for a lot of the parents that served on that for the 4 days in the beginning of January. But I wanted to put out a question to our attorneys. And I spoke briefly, Board Member Cummins is the one that actually brought this idea to my attention, and an attorney that she mentioned this to. Anyway, so basically in the U.S. Constitution, in Article 1, Section 10, it talks about that states cannot go into an agreement or compact with another state, and it's addressing time of war, but in there's some wishy-washy language that makes it sound like it may be broader than just 2 times of war, and I just wondered if you had taken a legal review of that. Maybe this is what Lisa's handing me, but I just wanted to get another take on it besides one.
So, and Dave and Brian, feel free to jump in, but we have looked at this, and it's an interesting issue. And it turns out that there have been courts that have found that if states enter into a compact and they cede their authority to a governing body in the compact, so the compact now is making the decisions instead of it at the states, then that cannot be done without approval by Congress. And that was to, prevent another Civil War back when it was created. But so, Dave and Brandon, correct me, but we have looked at this and believe that in this MOU, the state retains sufficient discretion such that that is not a barrier in this situation. Right, guys?
Okay. Board Member Reeby?
So I have administered these tests, and the science test is extremely exciting. The kids the kids come back and they literally are like, that was fun, I really liked it. They get to do virtual experiments. They get to pour beakers into stuff. They get to dip litmus test papers. They get to scratch things on a virtual board. And I don't think I'm violating any confidentiality by sharing what I've seen on these tests. We have an ability to prevent any kid from being a part of this test. It's called opting out. Those people that don't want to be a part of it, they can opt their kids out. They don't have to sit in front of this test. They don't have to be exposed to any questions. They can opt their child out. But for the 90% of the people who are taking this test, we need to have a test available that meets the needs of our students. I have also called the State Office of Education and I said, what's up with this question? It's on this number, and each question has a number on it. And the State Office of Education explained to me that although we didn't use this terminology in our curriculum, we feel that as a higher level question with a depth of knowledge, this would determine whether a kid could interpret a term that was put in something. There is a process where we can have a discussion about questions we don't like, and I have participated in it. I don't understand the ed blog. I don't think we should be quoting blogs. Blogs are just people's decisions to just share their information and opinions. So I don't think that's an appropriate thing to be sharing in a board meeting.
Board Member Hanson?
I call the question.
That is non-debatable. All in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Yeah.
So that motion passes. So that takes us back to the motion, and I have a question about the motion that was made from the committee, as it has in part of the request from the committee was to do something that's already taken place. Do we just leave that as part of the motion, saying we did check on how that appointment takes place, or do we just leave it the way it is? So to restate the motion, it was included that the process be clearly outlined for appointment of 5 USB Parent Review Committee members. Do we just leave that there, recognizing that we have gone through that process in this time period? Yeah.
I would suggest to divide the motion so you take it, so it's two separate items,
Okay.
and then you could
So if I,
give direction to.
without any opposing forces, we'll divide that motion. Is that okay? Correct my language anytime. So, okay, then we'll take that as two separate motions. And then, so the motion that's before us now is to move to participate in the Science Item Sharing Consortium. Period. Okay. All in favor? Any opposed?
No.
Okay.
Oh, you know who. It passed.
5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, the motion passes. Okay, then the second part of that motion was having a clearly defined process for appointing the 5 USBE Parent Review Committee members. Any,
Oh, can we discuss that, or is that
Right.
end of discussion on this?
So I guess the question is we've already clearly defined that that is in statute. Is that motion, I mean, I guess the motion is before us. And so do we just say, call the question? Okay, so call the question.
Oh, we can't talk about this part if we've divided them?
We called the question, which had both of them on there. So all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Okay, then that next, thank you.
Moving right along.
Can I speak to something to this, Vice Chair?
Yes, Chair Huntsman.
Right now, the chair appoints parents to this. There's some committee members that need to be replaced. We appointed one new one. We called out there, if I remember right, Lorraine. We have one.
Two.
Do we have two? When we were trying to put people together at the last second. So I am seeking names and recommendations to finish filling this out, or to fill out the 5-member.
Board Member Hanson.
And we talked about this in finance, if we want to give Mark recommendations like we do other recommendations. You know, they come before the board, we talk about them in executive session, and then we give them. Is it going to be like that? No. But could we make the process like that?
You can change the process, but I can say in this particular round that on this, because of that interest, right now it's in our rule that the chair assigns, but I can bring these names up in our executive if I want to, if I choose to, and that's my intent.
Okay.
So if there's names of
I
parents.
think that would be good, just
you could-
because we might know something about them
Please.
that might be
Yeah.
helpful.
And so if you could get something about them, their background, why they would want to serve, it's a 4-year. So with this being said, I'll have Lorraine send out a memo or send out a communication to you describing what the need is there, the number of meetings and frequencies, and then request names back with a little something about that person. So thank you, Vice Chair, for allowing me that time.
Thank you. Okay. Board Member Wright.
Thank you. We had an interesting discussion that kind of starts with our bylaws, and this is not something we'll be voting on, but our staff, and especially our key staff, our top 5 administrators, are frequently assigned to serve on a number of committees by the superintendent, by the legislature, by statute, and I think we all appreciate, our staff barely has the time to breathe. We burn them out, and also they struggle to do the requests from the board. And I use this term too much, but we are the sovereign, and our staff actually does work for us. And when they can't do our work because they're doing the work of other folks, it should be a cause for concern. So they are going to bring us tomorrow a list of all of the major engagements and time that they're spending on. And that might engender a discussion amongst the board on where somebody can prioritize, because they might simply need to choose, because they only have so much time. These are my highest priorities, and these I'm going to do if I can make it. Or I think we may even look for volunteers or other people to go and start doing these things. So anyway, we had a good discussion on that. And other finance committee members, if you think I'm missing something or you all ever want to chime in, please go ahead and do so. Really not a whole lot more. I just added that really in all data and reports we get, I hope they will always break it down by gender. It seems it's broken down by, income and ethnicity, and frequently not broken down by gender. Maybe I'm a lone person, but since I was the only male for a while here on the state school board, I did note that a lot of our boys seem to be regressing compared to our girls in our public schools. So I'm just going to toot that horn one more time. And I even felt like quite the minority for a while here.
Mark is feeling a little bit.
It is. Mark is here now, but for a while I was the only male member of the state school board at the meeting today. We need to raise our boys so they want to run for school board. That's okay. Me and my fellow boys are persecuted all around. We have been having reports from the various sections. There are about 19 sections within the Utah State Office of Education come and give us reports, including the State Charter School Board. They're giving us reports, and Board Member Stokes are like, why are we listening to this report? Can we do anything here? It was something to behold. You needed to have been there for me to fully communicate it. But he asked flat out, could, she's telling me these numbers, could we change these numbers for the State Charter School Board? And we actually got a pretty good answer. And maybe, unless you see, is Brian around? Yeah, Brian, maybe he's going to briefly tell us, what we can do with respect to that. Brian, is that okay, Vice Chair Cummins, if I give him some time?
And Joel, you're asking about this was the conversation we had with Spencer Stokes and Scott there in the Finance Committee about the ability to supervise and manage the line item for State Charter School Board. Yes. And so I've had a chance to look into that, and I've got some documentation in my office and for discussion. If you want some more detail, I've had a chance to talk with some folks over at the legislative office, finance, and it does appear to me that the board, this board does have the ability to oversee and supervise line item amounts. And so that would be my legal opinion on that. Just for example, just as this board does for USDB, just as this board did for USOR, which you might remember there was some trouble on that end, and just as this board does for numerous other line items, it is responsible. In fact, the SB1 that was just passed, and I've got a copy of this, puts a responsibility on this board to report back to the legislature on some of these line items, how they, some information and how they're spent has to be reported back, and the responsibility lies with this board and those obligations.
Joel, Brittany, I have a question. So when you say line items, you mean these are requests that the State Charter Board is making to the legislature? Is that what we're talking about? Line items for what then? It's out of context. Line items for what?
Kathleen, go ahead. Yeah.
For?
It was their budget. And so as they were budgeting stuff, we were wondering what the line items were for, and if we were allowed to say that we didn't agree to that, or it's too much money, or how we could appropriate money differently.
And the charter board who was presenting these were saying it's not your place to ask. Is that what?
No, Spencer, in his unique way, was questioning how this would change if we didn't agree with it. There was nothing in particular that we had big problems with, but he hypothetically picked out one and said, so if I didn't agree with that, how could we go about changing it?
I see.
And if we can't change it, why are we even having this conversation?
And so just to recap, Brian, your opinion is we can change it. The board could change it.
Theoretically, yeah, I believe so.
Well,
the board
theoretically,
has,
or?
well, it hasn't been done, but
Oh.
in theory, the board is responsible for how the money is spent, and so, yeah, so in theory.
It could.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get more context.
Board Member Reby.
So as we had this conversation, we then continued this conversation with another set of line items, with another set of data. So it wasn't just the charter schools. We started to question other things as well, and whether we have the ability to change that, or if we have the authority to overrule something that is being presented to us.
Now, I would just add, you don't have the wholesale ability to take money and then spend it in another program. There are some limitations. For example, in the line item, the money has to stay, it's my understanding, in that line item. So you can't take money from USDB and put it into the state charter school board or vice versa. So there are some of those limitations that are clearly built in.
And I would just like to add that even within the state charter school board's budget, there's portions of that that are appropriated specifically that we couldn't
Sure.
move around. So, okay, board member Wright.
Okay, moving along. I just encourage you to read it if you're interested. I don't think it's worth taking your time, except for one last point. Our staff has been working hard on equipment so that we can have like electronic voting, microphones, video streaming, and the systems they're looking at not only could work here, but could work off-site. So meaning we could, go on a road show, and have a board meeting, around the state, which potentially has a lot of benefits and different ways. So they're looking at that the cost has really come down, especially compared to maybe 5 or 10 years ago and stuff like that. And they're going to move forward, I think, with the purchase of this, and it might take a while to roll out, so be patient. That is all I have, unless any of the Finance Committee members have more to add.
Chair Huntsman.
Yes, there was one item that came out of there, and I wasn't part of your I apologize. I wasn't here for your 5.2 discretionary funds report, but we talked about in finance that we're still constantly seeking input from you on any special projects or anything that you want to work on. And as part of the process, we're required to keep evaluating what can we do and just not have that money stay stagnant there. So I'm not sure if that was covered today.
It was, yes.
Oh, very good. All right, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay, so that concludes our committee reports.